Let's see if I can get it where you can see Brenda. There, now you can see Brenda. Pretty girl. Yeah, pretty girl. My pretty girl. I love you. I'm your mama. And I'm going to talk about Big Mom. Fix the camera angle though first because that's not a good angle. This video is going to be the first of a two-part thing about Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom, Queen of Totland, former Yonko, well, technically possibly former Queen of Totland, depending on whether or not she's still alive, former member of the Rocks Pirates, user of the Soul Fruit, leader of, captain of the Big Mom Pirates, all that stuff. Strongest woman in the world. Take your pick. She's got a lot of different titles. But most notably, Mama by her children. So, as I said, this is going to be a two-part thing, kind of like what I did with Doflamingo, because there's so much information that we know about Doflamingo and his past and everything like that, and he's a very major character during, good chunks of the story. So it's like, Big Mom is this huge major character throughout Totland and throughout Wano in regards to all the stuff that happens with her. So, this is at least going to be a two-part thing, possibly a three-part thing. I might have to split up what happens in Totland and what happens in Wano into two separate things. I haven't quite made that decision yet. It depends on how long this video is. So this video is going to be talking about just overview of her along with her powers in regards to the Soro no Mi, the Soul Fruit that she has, and then her history from her childhood up through basically the beginning of the story, 2 years prior to when 2 years prior to where we are now. We don't know exactly what Big Mom was up to at the time, but that's kind of roughly where I'm going to be ending the video in regards to storyline wise. So, as I mentioned, in regards to rulers and leaders, Big Mom is on this list because she was or is, depending on whether or not she's alive, which we don't know yet. That has neither been confirmed nor denied yet, in regards to Oda and the story itself. We've seen evidence either way that she could be alive or she could be dead. We don't know yet. Or she could be in a coma and have amnesia again, for all we know. I don't know. We'll find out. Eventually, I hope. But in regards to this, she is the Queen of Totland, which is why I'm talking about her in the Royals and Rulers series. Also, I may end up putting the other Yonko in here at some point in time, possibly Kaido somewhere. I haven't quite decided on that in regards to going through when I get to Wano and everything. But also with Totland, I will be doing these two videos about Big Mom, a separate video where I break down Totland in regards to kind of all of the various islands that we are aware of and the various ministers that are in charge of those various islands and what each of those islands are for. And then I will have separate videos about a couple of her children, mostly some of the main ones that we interact with, like Katakuri and Pudding. I've done a video about Pudding previously when it was revealed that she'd been captured by the Blackbeard Pirates. I had a video about Pudding then, and what her next her next role in the story could be. Also, I plan on doing a video where I kind of do, a rankings video for all of the different Charlotte family members, for Big Mom, all of her children, and Pez. Because Pez is adorable. And he's the only grandchild we're aware of. Although, given where logic lands, a bunch of the other ones probably have kids too. We just have never seen them. But in regards to Big Mom, so she is one of the few characters in the series who has all three types of hockey. She has armament, observation, and conqueror's hockey, and she's one of the few women who has all three types of hockey. Really, the only other two that we're aware of is A, Boa Hancock, and B, Yamato, even though Yamato views himself as male, is technically biologically female, but I get where you're going with that. And there's not really any other female, you know, female, I want to say royal hockey. That's wrong. Conquerors hockey. I know the word. I said it a minute ago. Conquerors hockey rulers. So Conquerors hockey users. So Big Mom is kind of, one of those unique ones in that regard. And those abilities on their own make her exceedingly powerful. On top of that, she has exceedingly strong, like skin like a lead balloon, where she is just so hard to crack her physical defenses in that regard. On top of that, she is just exceedingly strong without even having any type of additional add-ons with using her hockey in that regard. And all of that amounts to just her being just exceedingly strong even as a child, before she'd even really probably awakened any form of hockey. From there, on top of all of that, she also has her devil fruit ability. She has her Sorosoronomi, the soul fruit. That is a paramecia, which allows her to take out pieces of not only her own soul, but other souls, and put them into objects, or in certain cases, put them into herself to make herself stronger. We see her do this with her own soul in Wano when she's fighting against Kid and Law. At the same time, she sacrifices a year of her life to herself to power herself up. And to fix her bones and everything. She turns her own bones into homies, which is that's pretty cool. I'll give her that. And of course, in regards to having this power, she has made her 4, technically now 3, considering one of them is no longer with her, personal homie. She, of course, has Prometheus, which is her sun homie, that is based off of fire and everything, and she's able to use that. She had Zeus, who is now with Nami, but she had Zeus, who was her thundercloud homie, that between the two of those, she was able to have a fair amount of control over the weather around her. And then she had Napoleon, who was her sword/hat. I never quite understood how that worked, but I'm like, sure, if I can have a hat that turns into a sword, I'm in. It's a homie. She can make it do whatever she wants. And then now her newest homie, Hera. And she is able to do various types of combination attacks with these, along with different singular attacks with them, where it's just only using one homie or using them in various combinations of things. And of course, most recently, one of the last things we saw her kind of create using her devil fruit power was, of course, her misery attack, which was, forming, kind of merging Prometheus and Napoleon and Hera all together into one homie. That resulted in, of course, the misery attack that she used while she was fighting against Law and Kid. And then lost. So we have that. Zeus, of course, has left, and he is now, on Nami's team, which I'll go over bits of when I get to those things in the next video. But beyond that, in regards to her physical abilities and stuff like that, she does have a fair amount of intelligence and cunning in her regard, given the fact that she is the one who kind of, has been ruling over this country, the country of Totland, not for the full 60 years, obviously, because she didn't exactly start ruling over it as soon as she was, got her devil fruit, but she's been, a variation of a queen within this area for a long time, for at least 30, almost 40 years, given when everything happened with the Rocks pirates. So she has that type of, royal decree power in that regard. She also terrifies the out of her citizens, but it's like, out of all the different places where you could live underneath certain Yonko, it's like, no offense to Kaido, but I would prefer to live in Totland than in Wano, because at least in Totland, my lifespan might be a bit shorter from having to give up 1 month of my life every 6 months for the leave or life tax, but and as long as I'm not on an island where Big Mom normally is, I'm probably going to be okay. for the most part. And as long as I don't make any of her children angry at me, I'll be fine, for the most part. And I mean, if anything, it's like I like baking and I like cooking. I'll be happy to work there. It's like, yeah, I'd rather live there than in Wano, for a lot of reasons. Um, in that regard, but there's dangers to living in any Yonko's territory. I mean, even if you live in Shanks' territory, that'd probably be the best, but then you gotta deal with Bartolomeo showing up and setting your town on fire and trying to force you to buy Luffy merchandise. Not that I would buy the Luffy merchandise, but you get the idea. And I don't know what it's like to live under Buggy, and I would have probably liked living under Whitebeard's flag in that regard. But so we see throughout the course of Totland and even into Wano to a degree how cunning and such like that Big Mom can be. She is also quite good when it comes to forming different types of attacks and different things along those lines. But going from there into her actual history. So basically what we get for Big Mom's history is when she was 6 years old. By the way, she's 68 right now. And of course, she's had children all the way up from when she was 18 all the way up until she was 60. So that was 42 years worth of having children. And her youngest child is only 8 years old. So the beginning for Big Mom is she's 6 years old, and her parents, who are these normal sized humans, bring her to the island of Elbath when she's just about 5 years old. And they bring her to the island of Elbath, which is the island of giants, where they assume, well, given how large she is now, this is probably the best place that's going to be the most copacetic place for her to be able to grow up, for the safest place for her to be able to grow up, where she will not be like this huge creature that's causing so many problems necessarily. And by a technicality, I would say her parents had somewhat of good intentions, but I also think that her parents were forced into it, because Linlin was exiled from her homeland because of the damage she had, uncontrollable behavior and her huge appetite. So she's left on Elbath by her parents, and they left her with like a bag of snacks, saying that they would come back, and they never did. And when she finished off her snacks and such, even though she waited and waited and waiting, they never showed back up. So what happens is she wanders into Elbath itself, where she ends up coming across the Sheep's House and Mother Caramel. And while there, she ends up finding out that, oh, the Sheep's House is a place where children can come who are, all these different various orphaned children and stuff like that are at the Lamb's house. And Mother Caramel is this very kind and caring motherly figure and everything like that, or at least that's what she's portrayed to be, of course. And Mother Caramel welcomes Linlin in, and she's come to the Sheep's House. We will keep you safe. You will live here, and this can be your new home, and you can learn about Elbath, and we will be your family, type of a thing. And for a little while, things are actually kind of okay. I mean, Linlin has friends, but throughout that time frame, she ends up getting to kind of learn about different races, but not in the easiest way. We see things where it's a little bit of, it's not her intentionally trying to be sadistic, but we see like some of her problematic ideas coming into play, because like she sees like a kid that's a fishman and she wants to take his gills off, and then like Mother Caramel's like, no, Linlin, you can't do that. He's supposed to be that way. He's a fishman. He's supposed to have gills. And then there's like a long-armed kid, and she tries to fix his arm, and Mother Caramel's like, no, you can't do that. That's the way he's supposed to be. He's a long arm. And probably this happened with a couple of the other, if there, I don't remember if we see any like long leg or snake neck people, long leg or snake neck kids at the orphanage, at the Lamb's house, but I'm assuming or at some point after maybe like the second incident, that Mother Carver's like, okay, I'm going to sit her down and teach her about the different races, and like teaches her about these different races. Long necks, snake necks, long arms, long legs, fishmen, things like that. So that way Linlin isn't like going to just instantly start to want to like fix them. And the thing is that in that moment, for Linlin, she's not trying to be sadistic or mean or anything along those lines. She's just using like the logic of a child, that, oh, this seems to be slightly different than what I'm used to. So is there a way to fix it? And then once it's explained to her, she's pretty accepting after that. During that point in time also is when there's these various incidents that happens with various animals. There's a bear that shows up that's a giant bear, and Linlin ends up killing it with like a single smack. Same thing with like this wolf, where she ends up killing it with like a single smack. And Mother Carmel is just very, very, very much inwardly like, oh boy, this kid is very, very dangerous. But outward, she's like very much pretending to understand, and she forgives Linlin because Linlin is sorry because she just wanted the Mr. Wolf and Mr. Bear to stop fighting. And it didn't go very well. There's also a moment where like a lot of this time frame she's interacting with the giants and everything like that, and there's a moment where like there's like a mosquito that lands on a giant, and she like smacks the mosquito, but it like breaks the giant's arm and different things like that. During this time frame, Linlin ends up actually becoming friends with one of the giant children, Gerd, who of course later grows up to be on the new giant warrior pirates with Hybridine, who we also see in the flashback. And Linlin and Gerd become friends, and it gets close in time where they're going to have their winter solstice, where they are going to, celebrate for so many days, and then they fast for 12 days. And of course, during this time frame, during the first part where they, have like this big, party, they eat all of this semla, which Big Mom just loves. And then when it's during the 12 days of fasting, which, in defense of like child Linlin, she does try very hard to, try to make sure that she is able to, get through the fasting, because she's explained that this is how we honor our sun god and everything like that. Okay, I'm going to point this out now, and I don't know if it's ever going to come up again, but it's the only thing that just popped into my head. So I love the fact that the giants honor part of their honor to the sun god to show their devotion and their strength is that they fast for 12 days. And then I love the fact that like the current incarnation of the sun god in Luffy as Nika is this utter glutton. And like Luffy would be like, no, I don't want you to fast for 12 days, just eat. Like, that would be Luffy's mentality. Like, I don't want you not eating just because you're trying to impress me. That's not going to impress me. Eat the food type of thing. I mean, that would be how Luffy would operate. And I just find that very funny for like that dichotomy there. But back to Linlin. And she tries very hard for those 12 days to, fight against her cravings and everything like that. Unfortunately, what happens is on the 7th day of the fasting is when she unfortunately finally snaps. And she goes on this rampage through the Elbaf town that she lives in, that's right near the sheep's house, and she goes on this rampage through there of hunger pangs and just causing so much destruction and fire and damage and everything like that, trying to get to the Semla. What ends up happening is, of course, the giants are trying to stop her. Mother Carmel shows up, and she is able to transform the fire that was, caused by Linlin and turn that into her own little personal homie, Pandora, which is this little fire homie. And Big Mom, the giants, give her all the semla, which she then proceeds to stuff her face and then pass out. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened during this moment was when Jarl decided that he was going to try to physically stop Linlin, and she just breaks his sword and flips him using his beard, which unfortunately causes him to become injured enough that he does end up dying. And she kills this giant who, admittedly, it's like a toddler going on a rampage, but in this case it's a much more dangerous type of a rampage. And a toddler may break a vase in the process of a rampage. This is much different. And Linlin has no memory of what happens, because by the time she wakes up, she's, she doesn't remember what happened, and she's like actually sad that the giant died. But when Linlin passed out, the other giant, one of them's Mountbeard, one of them's Fallbeard. I can never remember which is which. One of them, the other one who did not get killed by Linlin, actually tries to kill Linlin because of the damage that she caused. Due to Mother Carmel's pleading, she is able to prevent this, and Linlin, along with Mother Carmel and the rest of the members of the Sheep's House, have to leave. Elbath. And they move Elbath, or they leave Elbath, and they come to this other uninhabited island, which, given what we've learned about the world government recently in regards to the Tenryubito, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if at some point in the past, the island that ends up eventually becoming Whole Cake Island, where the second Sheep's House is built. By the way, I'm quite certain that the giants built the Sheep's House, the new Sheep's House on this island that would become Whole Cake, so that way it would be much easier for all of, for Mother Carmel and the children to leave, because Mother Carmel was still so beloved on the island. But the island that eventually becomes Whole Cake Island would not surprise me at all in the slightest if that was an island that had once been like the site of one of the population extermination games that the Tenryubito do every 3 years. I mean, the island's completely and utterly abandoned as far as we are aware when Mother Carmel gets there. And there, we don't know anything else about the island's history, but that would make sense given what we've learned. And what ends up happening is, of course, they rebuild, they build the Sheep's House, they move there. And then when it comes around time for Linlin's 6th birthday, things start to go not good. Things get worse, because to the audience, it is revealed that Mother Carmel is actually this child seller who works for the world government, and she sells children to them so that way those children can then be trained into cipher pull agents or admirals, or possibly even the fleet admiral, depending on stuff. And we become aware of this as the audience. Linlin and the other children never become aware of this fact, or at least as far as we're aware, they never do. There's theories that possibly some of the kids may have ended up being put into cipher pull, but not ever confirmed, so we can't really confirm that one way or the other, given the information that we have. But what ends up happening is Mother Carmel is intending to sell Linlin to the cipher pull, so that way they can then train her to become either the greatest shield for the Celestial Dragons, or to become possibly fleet admiral, that type of thing. And I know people have done like alternate universe things for like, what if Big Mom did join the Marines? And I'm like, that would be an interesting what if storyline. That would be interesting. But what ends up happening is, of course, that doesn't happen. On what is approximately Linlin's 6th birthday, the Sheep's House children, all along with Mother Carmel, make her this huge semla cake that she then ends up becoming so happy that she devours the whole thing, eats part of the table, and by the time, and putting it the most polite way, by the time she's done eating, Mother Carmel and all of the other children from the Lamb's house are gone. And she is left completely and utterly alone. That's what it is from her perspective. Us as the audience are basically given what's explained to us, and the horror of kind of what's seen by Struyson and another giant that had been on the island coming to see them. That didn't end well for Mother Carmel and the other children from the Lamb's house. Nope. Not at all. And what happens is, of course, Linlin is then left on her own. And she is, it's like she just had like the happiest moment of her life, followed by like one of the next most tragic moments of her life, because she is just so upset And she just she has no idea where Mother Caramel or the others are. She thinks they're playing hide and seek, and she looks all over the island for them, cannot find them. And I equate it to, the moment in Lilo and Stitch where Stitch goes out into the woods and he's like, I'm lost. And that's kind of what happens with Linlin, is she's like, she's lost, she's alone, she doesn't know what to do. Which unfortunately is when Streisand shows up. And he ends up, he reveals that he has this devil fruit that he's able to use to like chop up different ingredients and turn them into food ingredients. He can chop up a log and turn it into meat. He can chop up a rock and turn it into, a cheesecake. I don't know. He can do so much different stuff with his devil fruit, which is a pretty cool devil fruit. I will give Streisand that. And Streisand goes and talks to Big Mom or talks to Linlin, and he's, he witnessed her action, so he knows what happens, but he's like, I could have fun with this. And he goes to her and he basically says, hey, why don't we wait here until, your, Mother Caramel and the kids all show back up again. But while we do that, they end up, why don't we turn this into your dream country? And Big Mom, or Linlin at the time, is like, dream country? Yeah, like what Mother Caramel wanted, with all the different races where they could all live in harmony and be friends and everything like that. And I mean, the thing is that for Big Mom, for her wish to have, for her dream to have it be that like all of these different races could all be together and all be at the same table and all be happy together and everything, that's a very pure and good dream. Unfortunately, part of that gets twisted, partially by Streisand, partially by Big Mom thinking that everybody all needs to be the same size as her. So that's where, like, later on the gigantification experiments come into play that she pays Caesar Clown for. So that way she can, like, gigantify certain people to make them big. And, of course, that's kind of where, like, that impetus for that dream comes from, is wanting to be like what Mother Caramel always preached to her and preached to the kids. And by then Linlin has discovered that she has the powers of the Sorosoro no Mi. She's able to turn the flowers into homies. And she's like, oh, that's the same power that Mother Caramel had. That's cool. And so she, uses that power and she starts to, homeify and, all of, Totland. And starts awakening all of these, turning the trees and the flowers and rocks and bushes and stuff like that into homies. Which then, when the Marines show up to try to get her, after they, Mother Caramel sold Linlin to them, they show up on the island and they're terrified by all the different moving and singing plants. Not that I blame them at all, because I'd be very freaking terrified if I walked into an area that was like, the plants are singing and moving. I'm leaving. It's like, I was not promised this. This was not on the tour guide. This is not on the tour brochure. I'm leaving. I don't want to be here anymore. And, the Marines all run away after that. And from that point on, Streisand and Linlin basically kind of start to develop what would become like the proto version of the Big Mom Pirates. And they're able to start sailing around, probably to some of the other little islands around Totland. And Linlin starts kind of taking over those islands and becoming very notorious for, very high bounty of 50 million, even as a child. And she starts rampaging through these different towns. She's developed, at the very least, Prometheus by then. I think we see Zeus as well, but that's a little debatable. And she's able to use her homies to start causing problems on these other islands as her and Streisand attack them. And she's like, if you bring me food and, swear loyal to me or whatever, and join my dream country, then I'll let you live. And that's where, the leave or life thing starts coming into play. And Linlin starts to, develop this over a while, and she starts building up these different islands that are kind of under her control. Eventually, those islands all basically end up turning into what would become Totland. and she's homeified all of these different islands and taken, the little bits of life from people, and probably taken huge amounts of lives from people who tried to fight against her, and then she turned those into other homies. Now, the difference between what she does with those homies and the way that it works with Zeus, Prometheus, Hera, and Napoleon is that they are actually homies made by using parts of Big Mom's own soul. So they're more connected to Linlin. Not that she wouldn't be able to, make another homie do something, because they are all under her control, because she's the one that created them. As we see, even Big Mom's Weaver card that Nami has, piece of it is able to force the homies to obey her out of fear, to obey Nami out of fear. So, in that regard, it's not really all that much of a shock that, Linlin is able to amass this large territory so quickly. Over time, the island that became Whole Cake Island is built up, and she ends up getting to, by the time she's 18 years old, already has a fair amount of power at that point in time. She's definitely not Yonko level quite yet, but she's quite strong. And has developed Totland. And by the time she's 18 years old, she gives birth to her first child, who is Perospero. And then from there, she has, I cannot remember the name of her daughter, her oldest daughter, Carmen Miranda hat that's made out of fruit. It's like a giant fruit bowl on her head. Compet? I don't remember. But then she proceeds to start having, so many children birthed over the next 42 years. And, from the time she's 18 all the way up to when she's 60. And during this time frame, she has dozens of different husbands. I did the calculation at one point in time based around, every different birth group that she's had, between twins, triplets, quintuplets, quadruplets, the decatuplets when it comes to the tuplets, which is just, oh my god, and single births. I think I calculated out one day to like 20 something various different husbands in that regard. And I have a whole video where I talk about what it would have been like being married to Big Mom and all of that stuff that's involved with that. It's like Big Mom, Big Love, whatever it was that I called it, as part of my couple series for One Piece, which technically isn't finished. It's just we haven't had any other couples yet for me to talk about. I guess Kuma and Ginny, but I want to wait till I get pictures before I actually have anime stuff to work with before I can do that. But what ends up happening is, of course, over that time frame, Big Mom starts to, have all of these children and starts to amass this huge pirate crew. And of course, she has Joyce in there by her side. I know there's theories. Okay, now so it's 85 different children from 43 different husbands. I was trying to remember where the math was that landed on that one. 43 different husbands. That's what it was. It's there in my notes. I just forgot to look at that. But it is thought that possibly Streisand could be Perospero's father, just because they're very similar in facial design and everything. But I'm like, that's a little too creepy, so we're gonna move away from that. And eventually, when she's about 24 years old, Linlin ends up, along with Streisand, end up becoming members of the Rocks Pirates. And during that time frame, she ends up meeting a 15-year-old Kaido, who becomes an apprentice on the crew. And Linlin basically tells him, hey, if you have any problems, you come to me. Just think of me as your big sister figure and everything. And I think that Linlin, so the way that I think that what ends up happening for Linlin is that when she starts having children, she actually does care very much to take good care of them to a degree. But I think it's also, she has people in Totland that she keeps taking the children back to, so the children are mostly raised in Totland. And then by the time when she comes back from being on the Rocks Pirates 38 years ago, when she gets back to Totland, then she starts becoming more of this queen-like figure, as opposed to just a pirate ruling an area. And then things start to shift around a bit in that time frame. But what I think happens is, for at least the first couple of kids and batches that she has, she may tell them about Mother Caramel whenever she's home and everything like that. Because by the time she would have been on the Rocks Pirates, she would have had at least the first couple of batches of kids. I know that it would have been Perospero, Compento, I can't remember what the frick her name is, and then Katakuri, Daifuku, Oven, and then I think it's Amande and her group, and then I think there's the quintuplets. That's like Opera and all of those ones. I don't remember the exact birth order of all of them, but there's that setup where it's, I think by a certain point she would have at least been telling some of them some stories about Mother Caramel and stuff like that, and she would have had the picture. And I don't see her necessarily snapping at her kids just because they ask about Mother Caramel the way she snaps at the person at the party when they ask about Mother Caramel, much later on at the tea party, because he's not family. Her children are family. And I think she may have a little bit more of like mother instinct, particularly when she has like that mama mode that she goes into, like what Prometheus mentioned, when, you know, Big Mom was talking to Tama, that she goes into like mother mode or mama mode when it's like kids that are like under the age of 8 and stuff. And like when her kids were in that range, she probably told them stories about, you know, Mother Caramel and living in the sheep's house and blah 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 blah, and some of her adventures and exploits and everything like that. And then like, so maybe like the family knows about some of that stuff, but like outside the family they don't, because like the kids definitely know that Mother Caramel's picture means something a lot to her. Where she got the picture from, I will never know, but we may never know where she got the picture from, but you get the idea. And eventually what ends up happening is, of course, over the time frame that she is part of the Rocks crew, they become very, 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 very infamous. And, you know, she's part of the crew for about 6 years, give or take. And, you know, her and Kaido kind of have like that brother-sister relationship. I know going into Wano, there was this huge theory that like Kaido was like Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven's father type of a thing, and that's why Katakuri was so strong. That was one of those theories that I know a lot of people had, and I'm like, no, I mean, at the beginning I was like, I guess it could be possible, but then I'm like, no, because like I did the whole math thing of like figuring out when Yamato would have been born, and then also being like, okay, well, Kaido would have been about this old. Later on, when we find out about what his actual age is in comparison to Big Mom, it's like, no, it doesn't quite line up right. But what ends up happening is, of course, eventually we get to the God Valley incident, which is where Rocks and the rest of his crew, which of course is Big Mom, Kaido, Whitebeard, Rocks himself, obviously, Shiki, Silver Axe, Wangju, whichever way you want to put it, Buckingham Stussy, Streusen, if I didn't mention him, he's there as well, and Gloriosa, Grenadion. All of them are on the Rocks Pirates, and along with like some other ones that are there as like, you know, lower deck hands and everything like that. And we see them, you know, in part of Kima's flashback, we see them attacking God Valley when they're having these, when the, you know, when all of the celestial dragons are having their extermination game. And what ends up happening is, while this is going on, Big Mom makes her way to part of the island where they have the treasures, and she ends up taking the Ua Ua no Mi model Seiryu from Ivankov. And then later, she ends up then giving that same devil fruit to Kaido, so that way Kaido can survive whatever it is that happens on God Valley. And she gives him that, and that kind of creates like a life debt, because if she hadn't given him that, supposedly he would have died. Now, we don't know exactly what it was that ended up happening on God Valley, beyond the fact of, you know, the Roger Pirates are there, Garp is there leading a bunch of Marines, and they're there, and they fight against the Rocks Pirates. And Roxy Zebek supposedly dies. That's about it. That's a different theory video. But Linlin gets the Unomi and ends up giving it to Kaido later on, which I just... there's an alternate universe out there that I know people have dreamed up already where it's Ivankov actually ends up getting the dragon fruit because he ate it fast enough. And then Kaido ends up with the hormone devil fruit, which I'm just like, I kind of want to see that world. That seems very, very entertaining. With Kaido able to manipulate hormones and everything like that. That just seems very entertaining, in my opinion. It just does. I know that there's like a whole other world where that happened, and where Ivankov is a freaking dragon. I want to see that world. I want that manga. I want that alternate universe. Dragon in the Revolutionary Army. I thought I was the dragon here. Fuck, will you please take off the fishnet stockings? No, they make my scales look fabulous. Just dragged in the corner. Why did I hire this man? But back to this. So what ends up happening, after what happens during the God Valley incident is that supposedly Big Mom is actually kind of hurt by the fact that Kaido ends up abandoning the remnants of the Rocks Pirates because she ends up back at Hachinosu. She's angry that he's not there. And eventually, after that, she ends up going back to Totland. And she continues to form her own crew and have more and more children over the next so many years. Sometime during this time frame, Roger, some point during the time frame, Big Mom ends up getting her hands on a road poneglyph along with a couple of others. And she has the road poneglyph in her treasure room on Whole Cake Island. By this time, I'm kind of thinking Totland is fairly established at this point in time in regards to like her territory, just given how strong she would be in being able to have homies on these different islands and not just having her own children as parts of the crew, but also having other pirates as part of her crew as well. And of course, we know that she uses her children in dynastic marriages, and the fact that, she wanted to, she married Chiffon to, the Fire Tank Pirates, so that way Beiji would be supposedly on Big Mom's side. Same thing with, like, trying to do the marriage between Pudding and, or the guise of using it as a guise for having Pudding marry Sanji, so that way she could have the Vinsmokes as supposedly allies, aka kill them and take their power, take their cloning technology. Cloning and modification technology. And supposedly Big Mom has done that for a lot of her children. I don't know the exact translation of it, but I know that there's something where, like, when the Straw Hats are talking with Pudding inside of her chocolate cafe store, that she mentions, oh, well, there's 85 of us children, and I'm number blah, 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 daughter number blah, 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 child blah, 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 blah. And a lot of my older siblings are already married and have children of their own. I don't remember if she gives an exact number of how many of them are married, but the only spouse that we end up meeting during the course of Totland is Beiji. And, he is a very good spouse to Chiffon, and then of course later on Gotti marries Lola in the, Oh My Family cover story. I want to see Lola again. I love Lola. But, during all of this time frame, Big Mom supposedly has been marrying her children off to other people, other pirate captains, or to kings or something like that, or princes or princesses or whatever of other islands, so that way those islands would come under her control. In that regard. And from there, she's developed this whole system. And of course, she has other, areas underneath her control based around, oh, this place has exquisite fruits, and this place has amazing nuts, and oh, this place makes wonderful, wonderful wine, and so many other stuff that goes along with that. And of course, as I'll go over when I talk about Totland as a whole, all the different islands have a different thing that they specialize in for the most part. And then of course, in regards to building up Totland, she builds up, the Whole Cake Chateau, where a good chunk of the Charlotte family live whenever they're on the island. And of course, there's Sweet City, and there's of course the Seducing Woods that she's built up and everything as like, a defense deterrent against, anyone who tries to come into her territory and everything. Of course, during this time frame, at some point in time, she ends up marrying Pound, and they have Chiffon and Lola together. And then, of course, she kicks Pound out, and everything. And, you know, sometime again within this time frame, Roger manages to sneak into Totland, get the information off of Big Mom's poneglyph, get it from a rubbing, and then take that and have, you know, Odin translate it, and then they're able to go and find their way to Laugh-Tale. After that happens, and Roger makes his big, you know, big statement to the world at his execution that, you know, the One Piece and the treasure and blah, 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 blah. Big Mom tries to go and find it. She has one poneglyph, but she doesn't have a way to read it. So she starts looking to try to find a very specific race. And she eventually ends up, of course, finding a member of the Three-Eyed Tribe, a male. And he's her whatever number husband, and they have a daughter, Charlotte Pudding. Now, considering the fact that Pound is the only husband that we ever end up have met throughout the course of the series, I know that there's series that, like, maybe some of the other Rocks pirates, like the guys, may have been children or fathers to some of her children, and there's the Stroyson theory, and then, of course, the Kaido theory when it comes to certain stuff. But, and that may be all well and good where that was the case. It may also just been, these may have just been other pirates that she met along the way, or other just members of these different races, so that way she could have a half human, half long, you know, long arm, long leg, snake neck, Totto, fishman. She has a couple of fishman ones and a couple of snake neck batches and such, and stuff like that. And then just other, like, interesting humans, and things like that, to have children with. And she's done that, and she has so many of those children. And what ends up happening is, of course, she has Charlotte Pudding, and we have the moments with Pudding, which I'll probably go over in a bit more detail when I get to talking about Pudding herself. But Pudding, of course, if she is able to awaken her third eye, should be able to read the poneglyphs. But until that happens, she's not exceedingly useful to Big Mom yet. She's useful in the fact that she's like a wonderful little actress and everything like that for Big Mom to use to toy with Sanji and with the Germa and such, but she's not particularly as useful as she could be down the line. And unfortunately, that results in, of course, Big Mom bullying Pudding herself and causing, you know, Pudding to have all of those issues that just compound, and now Pudding basically has, you know, multiple personality disorder or associative identity disorder, depending on how you want to put it, where she flips back and forth between the two different Puddings. But the other child that seems to, the other two children that have had this biggest problem with Big Mom at the moment are Chiffon and Lola. And what ends up happening is, of course, at one point in time, Prince Loki of Elbath comes to Linlin and ends up seeing Lola somehow and ends up falling in love with her and wants to marry Lola. Big Mom is perfectly happy with this idea, thrilled, overjoyed, and it's like, yes, 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 we'll arrange the wedding as soon as possible, because then she'll have the giants on her side for the first time in however long, given the grudge between the giants and her. And what ends up happening is, unfortunately, Lola leaves because she does not want to marry someone that she does not love, and that's why she leaves and becomes proposing Lola of the, you know, of the Rolling Pirates, and heads off and does that. And Big Mom, angry about this, attempts to replace Chiffon as the bride. Loki sees through this, does not want Chiffon as his bride, gets even angrier at Big Mom for the fact of, not only did the bride that you promised me is not here, you tried to fool me with this fake, and now the giants will never be your allies. And then he leaves, and that causes Big Mom to become exceedingly even more angry with Chiffon and take out her anger about Lola on Chiffon almost any time that Big Mom sees Lola. Or her anger about Lola on Chiffon anytime she sees Chiffon. And that causes a lot of problems there. And, you know, that compounds to more issues for Big Mom to deal with later. During this time frame, of course, there's other things that happen. She's had so many other children within this time frame. 8 years ago, or 6 years prior to the story starting, she had her final child, Charlotte Anana, who is her youngest child and is adorable, even though she really likes knives and stabbing things. Knives and stabbing weapons, and such. And of course, Big Mom, throughout the time frame of raising her children, has cultivated this kind of loyalty to her and to each other, because we are family, whereas your fathers are not necessarily family. Because like Cracker does not care if he if he hurts Pound in the seducing woods. He does not care. Neither does Brule. And for them, for all of the kids, going back through so many of the different fathers that they've had, the fathers are only around for 9 months to a year, if that. Depending on when Big Mom meets them and everything. As she has all of her different children. And then, as soon as the children are, born and healthy, she kicks out the dad and she moves on to trying to find another one, is probably even husband shopping to a degree before she even gets to the point where she's given birth. She's like, okay, well, so far the pregnancy is going well and everything seems to be fine. By the way, that also just means that Big Mom has spent a huge amount of her adult life having to fight while being pregnant. And I read in a fanfic once, and it makes perfect sense if Big Mom actually was able to employ this, because she is quite good at armament hockey, and we see her being able to use Ryuo later on in Wano, that it would make sense if during any time that she was pregnant, anytime she went into battle or was training, she just has like a huge amount of coating of Conqueror's hockey over her stomach and womb, so that way the baby inside of her is kept safe. And that would be a very ingenious way of using armament hockey. And it's not like we haven't seen pregnant women perform amazing feats throughout the course of One Piece. I mean, Rouge kept herself pregnant for like so much longer than would have been anywhere near possible in order to protect Ace. And Big Mom being able to do something similar to that makes sense too. But she spends so much time and effort building up Totland and having all of these children and cultivating this setup. And then we have the moment where kind of the most recent thing that we are aware of within the timeline before we get to, just post, just to where the story actually starts, is about 5 years ago. So about 3 years before 3 years before Luffy starts his journey. And this is when the Nox pirates enter her territory, which would be Pedro and Zeppo and the other Nox pirates. They arrive in her territory, and their intention is to get to the road poneglyph. But unfortunately, they end up getting captured, and for punishment, they spin her, the roulette wheel to determine what punishment they will have. Will they lose a limb? Will they lose a certain amount of lives, a certain amount of years? And it lands on 100 years. And Zeppo steps up, and she tries to take 100 years from his lifespan, but it only results in taking, I think, 30 years from Zeppo. But that doesn't end up, it's not enough. And Zeppo, unfortunately, dies from that. And then she turns to Pedro, and she's like, okay, well, I'm going to take the other 70 from you. And in a bit to appease her, he, cuts out his own eye, gives that to her, and she knocks off, I think, 20 years of the punishment instead. And, she, he's like begging her to let him leave so he can make it to Zou, and so that way he can, see the new dawn and everything like that, and, help fulfill this prophecy that the Minks have been waiting for. And between that and the ripping out of his own eye, she, out of respect for his spirit, as she says, she decides only to take 50 years of his life instead of the 70. And she takes that, and he's, taken out of Totland by Perospero, escorts Pedro out of Totland and sends him on his way. And that's about, closest to the beginning of the story that we know of what's been going on for Big Mom, and Totland in general. In the next video for this, I will be going into what happens, just after, prior, around the time skip time frame, going into what happens throughout Zou and into Totland. And depending on stuff, that may end up getting split into 2 parts, because I might do all of Totland set up in one and then do everything that happens with Linlin and Wano in another, just because there's so much there. And she's such a major character in both arcs. I might do it that way instead. But, you know, when it comes to Big Mom, I mean, like, trust me, I understand why people have problems with, like, the amnesia stuff that happens in Wano. I don't blame people for having an issue with that in regards to that. But the thing is that given how chaotic and childlike she is already, and her having memory problems already, that kind of works a bit better. I do like Big Mom to a degree. She's got a very good backstory, and she's very strong, and she's one of the ones who is just like, I don't care, I'm going to be the one to rule these seas regardless of what anyone says. I'm going to be the woman that's going to rule these seas. That's one of the things she tells Kaido when she first meets him on Rox's crew. And I just find her very interesting to a degree. And I mean, if I didn't at least find a lot of these characters that I'm talking about somewhat interesting, I don't think I would be putting this much effort into talking about them. I mean, there's some I find more interesting than others, but, you know. This is, first part for Big Mom is finished, so kind of just child Big Mom going into, you know, just prior to the beginning of the series. And then I'll do, at the very least, Totland, her and Totland for, like, all of that happens during the Totland arc, the Whole Cake Island arc, in the next video, and then possibly Wano in its own separate video. We'll see. That depends on how long the other one runs. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. And Brenda, do you want to say goodbye? Okay, she licked. Okay, bye.